I'm going to tell you something that happened 3 years ago, and yeah, I'm still furious about it. Some of you are probably going to say, I should let it go, move on. Be the bigger person. Those people can save their advice because I've spent 3 years planning what came next, and I'm not sorry about any of it. I was 20 when my parents sat me down and told me they were giving my college fund to my sister Alicia for her wedding. Not asking, telling. The fund that I'd been contributing to since I was 12 years old. Every birthday check from grandparents, every dollar from mowing lawns in middle school, every paycheck from my summer jobs in high school, I'd saved $8,000 of my own money that went into that account, and my parents had matched it over the years. We were supposed to have around $32,000 total by the time I graduated community college and transferred to a four-year school. Alicia was 26 at the time, marrying this guy Brad, who worked in commercial real estate and thought he was hot stuff because he drove a BMW and wore expensive watches. I'd met him maybe 3 times, and each time he looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. The last time was at some family dinner where I showed up still wearing my Walmart vest because I'd come straight from my shift, and Brad made this comment about how some people are just born to serve others. My dad, Kelvin, laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. But let me back up and give you the full picture, because you need to understand how calculated this whole thing was. I'd been working at Walmart since I was 17, started as a cart pusher and worked my way up to the electronics department. By 20, I was pulling double shifts whenever I could, sometimes working 50 to 60 hours a week while taking classes at community college. My plan was simple: finish my associate degree, save money, transfer to state school, get my bachelor's in computer science, and get the hell out of retail forever. I had it all mapped out, and that college fund was the safety net that made it possible. My parents knew this. We'd talked about it for years. My mom, Noelle, used to brag to her friends about how responsible I was, how I was putting myself through school, how proud she was that I was so independent. My dad would tell his buddies at work that I was going to be the first person in our family to get a real degree. Then Alicia got engaged to Brad, and suddenly everything changed. The wedding planning started about 6 months before they told me about the fund. Alicia would come over every week with magazines and fabric samples and catering menus, and our parents would ooh and ah over everything. Brad wanted a wedding at this fancy venue outside the city with a live band and an open bar and a 7-course dinner. The whole thing was going to cost somewhere around $50,000, which Brad's parents were supposed to be covering since they had money, and our parents definitely did not. Except Brad's parents decided they weren't going to pay for the whole thing. They offered $15,000 and said the rest was on Brad and Alicia. And Brad, despite his BMW and his watches and his big real estate job, apparently didn't have any savings because he spent everything he made trying to look successful. So Alicia came crying to our parents about how she couldn't have her dream wedding, how Brad's parents were being unreasonable, how she'd been planning this her entire life. And my parents, who had always loved Alicia more than me anyway, decided they knew exactly where to get the money. They called me into the living room on a Thursday evening in November. I remember because I'd just finished a brutal 10-hour shift and I was exhausted, and I thought maybe they wanted to talk about Thanksgiving plans or something normal. Instead, my dad told me they'd decided to give the college fund to Alicia for her wedding. Not some of it, all of it. I actually laughed at first because I thought it was a joke. Then I saw their faces and realized they were serious, and I asked what I was supposed to do about school. My dad said I could take out student loans like everyone else. My mom said I was young and strong and could work my way through, that it would build character. I told them $8,000 of that money was mine, money I'd earned and saved. And my dad said, well, actually, it was in their account, so legally it was theirs. And besides, Alicia needed it more. I asked how a wedding was more important than my education. And my mom got this look on her face like I'd just said something incredibly selfish. She told me Alicia deserved to have a beautiful day, that she'd been dreaming about this wedding since she was a little girl, and that I should be happy for my sister instead of being so self-centered. The kicker was when my dad added that when I got married someday, they'd help me out too. And my mom laughed and said, if anyone ever wants you, in this tone that made it crystal clear what she thought about my chances. Both of them laughed, like it was hilarious that their son was working double shifts at Walmart while going to school and might never find someone who'd want to marry him. I didn't yell or argue, throw anything. And looking back, I think that scared them a little. I just sat there for a minute, then I got up and left the house. Drove around for 3 hours thinking about how every choice I'd made for the past 8 years had been with that college fund in mind. And now, it was just gone because my sister wanted a fancy party. Here's what really got me, though. About 2 weeks later, I got a text from Alicia. Not an apology, not a thank you, just a message saying that Brad didn't want me at the wedding. She said Brad thought I'd bring down the aesthetic because I was too low class for the kind of event they were planning, and it would be better if I just stayed home. She actually used the word aesthetic, like I was a piece of furniture that didn't match their color scheme. I texted back asking if she was serious, and she said Brad's family was paying for part of it and they got to decide who came. And besides, it wasn't like I had anyone to bring as a plus one anyway, so what was the point? Then she added that she wished the fund had been bigger because now she had to cut some things from her vision, like she was disappointed in me for not having saved more. No thank you. No acknowledgement that this was my future she was using to buy centerpieces and a DJ. The wedding happened 4 months later. I didn't go, obviously. I spent that Saturday working a double shift and then sat in my apartment that I was renting with 2 roommates, eating pizza and thinking about how I was going to have to take out $40,000 in loans now instead of the $12,000 I'd originally planned for. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting. I didn't break down. I didn't spiral. I got angry, and I stayed angry, and I started thinking very clearly about what I was going to do about it. Because see, what my family didn't know was that over the years, through all those family dinners and holiday gatherings and Sunday barbecues, I'd been the one everyone talked to. My dad would complain to me about his back problems and how his job was killing him. My mom would vent about her sister and their decades-old feuds. Alicia would tell me about her relationship problems with Brad, about how he'd cheated on her twice before they got engaged, about how his parents looked down on our family. I knew things, a lot of things. Things they'd told me because I was always just there. Working-class Calvin who wasn't important enough to worry about, who'd keep his mouth shut because what else was I going to do? And I realized something sitting in my apartment that night. They'd taken my money, excluded me from their celebration, and mocked me to my face. But there they hadn't just stolen $32,000. They'd made a mistake that was going to cost them a whole lot more than that. I didn't want revenge immediately. That would have been sloppy. I wanted them to forget about me, to think I just accepted it and moved on like a good little doormat. So I kept my head down, kept working, kept going to school. I was polite at family events when I had to attend them. I didn't cause drama. I let them think I was harmless. What I actually did was finish my associate degree, then transfer to state school like I'd planned. Except now I was doing it with student loans and an even more intense work schedule. I busted my back for 2 more years, graduated with my bachelor's, and landed a decent job in IT at a mid-sized company. Not amazing money, but enough to start paying down my loans and build up some savings again. I moved to an apartment 40 minutes away from my parents, far enough that I didn't have to see them regularly, but close enough that they could still reach me when they needed something. And oh, they needed things. My dad's back got worse and he needed help with yard work. My mom wanted me to fix her computer every time she got a virus from clicking on random links. Alicia wanted me to watch her kids when she had them because free babysitting from Uncle Calvin who had no life anyway, right? And I did it. I helped them because I wanted them to need me. I spent 3 years learning everything I could about their lives, their finances, their secrets, their dependencies. I made myself indispensable in small ways they didn't even notice. I fixed my dad's computer and made sure I was the one with all his passwords. I helped my mom set up her social media and became the person she called when she needed tech support. I watched Alicia's kids and listened to her complain about Brad's drinking and his temper and how their marriage wasn't what she'd thought it would be. I waited. I planned. I remembered every detail of how they'd laughed at me, how they'd stolen from me, how they'd decided I wasn't worth even being at my own sister's wedding. 3 years I waited. And then about 3 months ago, they reached out because they needed something else from me. And I realized it was time. See, my dad had taken early retirement last year because of his back, and it turned out their finances weren't as stable as they'd pretended. My mom was still working part-time at a salon, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. And Alicia and Brad? Their perfect marriage was falling apart because Brad had gotten fired from his job for harassing a coworker, and suddenly their fancy lifestyle wasn't so easy to maintain. They all needed money, and they all assumed that nice, reliable Calvin, who'd worked his way up to a decent IT job and was doing okay for himself, would help out family when they needed it. The voicemail started about 93 days ago, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly what I did and why it worked so perfectly. Update 1. Okay, so the comments on my last post were wild. Shout out to everyone who said I should have cut them off years ago. Trust me, I thought about it. But that wouldn't have been enough. I didn't want to just disappear from their lives. I wanted them to need me first, then realize they'd screwed over the one person who could actually help them. Let me tell you what happened 3 months ago that started all of this. My dad called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at work. He never calls during the day, so I knew something was up. He started with small talk, asking about my job, my apartment, whether I was eating properly. Then he got to the point. He and my mom were having trouble making their mortgage payment. His retirement wasn't covering as much as they'd thought. My mom's hours at the salon had been cut, and they were about 2 months behind. He asked if I could loan them $5,000. Just temporarily, of course. They'd pay me back as soon as things stabilized. He said it with this tone like it was a totally reasonable request, like I owed them this somehow. I asked why they didn't use some of that $32,000 they'd taken from me 3 years ago. There was this long silence, and then my dad said that money was gone, spent on Alicia's wedding, and I needed to stop living in the past. He actually said that. Stop living in the past like they'd borrowed $20 from me instead of stealing my entire future. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. But here's what you need to understand. I'd been monitoring their finances for over a year at this point. Remember how I said I fixed my dad's computer and had all his passwords? Yeah, I knew exactly how bad their situation was, and it was way worse than $5,000 behind on the mortgage. They had credit card debt in the mid-20s, a home equity line they'd maxed out, and my dad had taken out a personal loan at some point that he was defaulting on. My mom had been paying for Alicia's kids' daycare for the past 6 months because Alicia couldn't afford it. They were drowning, and they'd been drowning for a while. But I didn't tell them I knew any of this. I just said I'd think about it. 2 days later, Alicia called. She didn't even bother with small talk. She launched right into how Brad had been out of work for 8 months now, how they were going to lose their house, how her kids were going to suffer. She said I was doing well for myself and had no one else to support, so clearly I could afford to help family. She needed $10,000. $10,000. Not asked, needed. Like it was my obligation. I asked her what happened to all that wedding money, all those fancy centerpieces and the 7-course dinner and the live band. She got defensive immediately and said that was years ago. And how dare I throw that in her face when she was struggling? She said Brad's situation wasn't his fault, that the woman who accused him of harassment was lying to get attention, that his former company was just looking for an excuse to fire him. Then she said something that really set me off. She said I should be grateful they even asked me instead of just expecting me to offer, because that's what family does. They help each other. And she reminded me that they'd raised me, fed me, put a roof over my head for 18 years, so technically I owed them way more than $10,000. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. The calls kept coming. My mom texted me these long messages about how disappointed she was, that I was being so selfish, how they'd always been there for me and now I was abandoning them in their time of need. My dad left voicemails talking about family loyalty and how blood is thicker than water. Alicia sent me pictures of her kids with captions about how I was letting my niece and nephew suffer, and I let them stew. I didn't respond right away. I wanted them desperate. About 3 weeks into this, Brad called me directly. We hadn't spoken since before the wedding, and honestly, I thought the guy had forgotten I existed. But there he was on my phone, trying to sound friendly and reasonable. He said he knew we'd had our differences, but he was hoping we could move past that, man to man. He said he was in a tough spot and needed help getting back on his feet, and he'd heard I was good with computers, so maybe I could help him polish up his resume or connect him with job opportunities. I almost laughed. This dude had called me low class, had me uninvited from my own sister's wedding, and now he wanted career advice? But I played along. I asked him what kind of positions he was looking for, what his situation was. And that's when Brad made his first mistake. He started talking, really talking. He told me the harassment accusation was overblown, that he'd just been friendly with a younger coworker and she'd misinterpreted things. He said his former company had it out for him because he'd been making more commission than the other agents and they were jealous. He said his parents had cut him off financially because they blamed him for losing such a good job. And Alicia's parents, my parents, weren't helping either, even though they owed Alicia for being such a good daughter. That last part pissed me off. They owed Alicia? For what, exactly? But I kept my cool. I told Brad I'd see what I could do, maybe ask around at my company. He thanked me, sounded genuinely relieved, and said he knew I was a good guy despite what Alicia sometimes said about me. Despite what Alicia sometimes said about me. I asked him to clarify that, and Brad backtracked fast. He said, oh, nothing serious, just sister stuff. You know how siblings are. But I pushed. And eventually he admitted that Alicia talked about me like I was the family disappointment. The one who didn't have ambition, who was content working a regular job and living a regular life. She'd apparently told Brad's family that I was the reason our parents weren't more financially stable, because I'd never helped them out even though I had a decent income now. Let me repeat that. Alicia told Brad's family that I was the reason our parents were struggling financially. Me, the guy whose college fund they stole to pay for her wedding. I thanked Brad for his honesty and ended the call. Then I sat at my desk and thought very carefully about my next move. Because here's what I realized. They weren't just asking for money. They were creating a narrative where I was the bad guy, the selfish son and brother who refused to help his struggling family. They were already setting up the story where they were the victims, and I was the villain. So I decided to give them exactly what they'd given me 3 years ago, a promise they couldn't keep and consequences they didn't see coming. I called my dad back that evening and told him I'd thought about the loan. I said I cared about family and I wanted to help, but I needed to understand the full situation first. I suggested we all sit down, him, my mom, Alicia, and Brad, and go over everyone's finances together so I could figure out the best way to help. My dad was hesitant at first. He said it wasn't necessary, they just needed the money, but I insisted. I said I was being responsible, that I wanted to make sure my help actually solved the problem instead of just putting a band-aid on it. I said I'd learned that from him, actually. He'd always taught me to be smart with money. That got him. He agreed to set up a family meeting for that Sunday. The meeting was at my parents' house. Everyone showed up because they all wanted money and thought I was finally going to play the role of good son and brother. My mom had made her famous lasagna, like this was going to be a pleasant family dinner where we'd all laugh and bond. I brought my laptop and a folder of documents I'd prepared. Nothing illegal, nothing hacked, just information I'd gathered from conversations, from things they'd told me themselves over the years, from publicly available records. We sat around the dining room table and I started with my dad. I asked him to walk me through his retirement income and monthly expenses. He was vague at first, but I pressed. I brought up specific bills I knew they had, asked about the personal loan, mentioned the credit card debt. My mom's face went white. She asked how I knew about all that. I said I was just being thorough. I turned to Alicia and Brad. I asked about their mortgage, their car payments, Brad's job search. Brad got defensive immediately. He said his finances weren't my business, and Alicia jumped in saying I was being invasive and controlling. I pointed out that they'd all asked me for money. So actually, their finances were very much my business if they expected me to hand over $15,000 total. Then, I brought up the wedding. I said I'd done some math, and I was curious where exactly my $32,000 had gone, because according to the venue's pricing that I'd looked up online, the whole wedding couldn't have cost more than $45,000. Brad's parents had contributed $15,000, so that meant my college fund should have covered most of the rest. So where did the remaining money go? Alicia started to say something, but Brad cut her off. He said they'd had other expenses, that weddings cost more than just the venue, that I was being ridiculous bringing this up now. I asked what other expenses. Honeymoon? Alicia's dress? The rings? I wanted an itemized breakdown of where my future had gone. My dad told me to drop it, that this was ancient history. My mom said I was ruining a nice family dinner. Alicia was getting tears in her eyes, doing that thing she always did when she wanted sympathy. So I dropped it. I said, okay, fine, we don't need to rehash the past. Instead, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about how I was going to help them. Everyone perked up. My mom smiled. My dad looked relieved. Alicia wiped her fake tears. I told them I'd thought about it carefully, and I'd realized that the best way I could help was to stop helping. No more fixing computers for free. No more tech support. No more watching Alicia's kids. No more yard work. No more being the family's unpaid IT department and handyman and babysitter. Instead, I was going to charge my standard rates. $50 an hour for tech support, $75 for watching kids, $100 for yard work and home repairs, all payable up front before service is rendered. The table went silent. My mom asked if I was joking. I said I wasn't. I explained that I'd calculated how much free labor I'd provided over the past 3 years, and it came to roughly $48,000 in services they'd received from me while I was struggling to pay off student loans they'd forced me to take out. Alicia called me petty and cruel. Brad said I was being vindictive over something that happened years ago. My dad said I was punishing them for trying to help my sister have a nice wedding. I packed up my laptop. I stood up. I told them that when they stole my college fund, they told me I should be happy for Alicia, that family helps family. Now I was helping them learn what it meant to stand on their own. My mom started crying. Real tears this time, not Alicia's fake ones. She asked how I could do this to them, to my family. I said they did it first. I walked out while Alicia was screaming at me about what a terrible person I was, how I'd always been jealous of her, how I was destroying this family. Brad was yelling something about me being a selfish piece of work. My dad just sat there. That was 4 weeks ago. Since then, things have gotten so much worse for them. Because the thing is, I wasn't bluffing about cutting them off. And they didn't realize how much they'd actually been depending on me until I was gone. My dad's computer crashed 3 days after that dinner. Normally, he'd call me. Instead, he had to take it to a repair shop and pay $200 to get it fixed. My mom got locked out of her social media accounts and couldn't figure out how to reset her passwords. She lost access to a bunch of photos she had stored online. Alicia called me in a panic because her kid's daycare was closed for a week, and she needed a babysitter. I told her my rates. She hung up on me. She had to take unpaid time off work and lost almost $300. But the real problem started when they realized I'd been the one maintaining all their digital accounts. Their streaming services, their online banking, their email filters, everything. I'd set it all up, managed it, kept it running, and when I stopped doing that for free, things started falling apart. My mom's email got hacked because she clicked on a phishing link, and I wasn't there to fix it. Someone got into her account and sent spam to everyone in her contact list, including people from her church. She was mortified. My dad couldn't figure out how to access his retirement account online and missed a required minimum distribution deadline. There was a penalty. Alicia's home security system stopped working, and she couldn't figure out how to troubleshoot it. She had to pay for a technician to come out. None of these things were devastating on their own, but altogether, they were expensive, inconvenient, frustrating, and I wasn't there to save them anymore. The calls started getting angry. My mom left voicemails saying I was being cruel, that I was deliberately sabotaging them. My dad sent texts about how disappointed he was in the man I'd become. Alicia sent a long message about how I was proving I'd never cared about her kids, that I was using innocent children as pawns in whatever twisted game I was playing. But here's what's really eating them up. Brad found out about our parents giving me their house key years ago for emergencies, and he lost it. He accused Alicia of coming from a family of failures who couldn't even keep their own son loyal. He said her family was the reason they were in this mess, that if her parents hadn't wasted money on that wedding, they'd have money to help now. Alicia called me crying about how Brad was turning on, how he was saying horrible things about our family, about me specifically. She said Brad called me a parasite who was bleeding them dry by charging for basic favors. And she wanted me to know that even though we were fighting, she still defended me to Brad. She wanted credit for defending me. After everything, I asked her if she remembered telling Brad's family that I was the reason our parents were struggling. She denied it at first, then admitted Brad might have overheard her venting once. She said I was taking it out of context. There is no context where that's okay. Things escalated 2 days ago. My mom showed up at my apartment without calling first. She looked exhausted, older than I remembered. She asked if we could talk inside. I let her in because I was curious what she'd say. She sat on my couch and started with an apology. She said they'd made mistakes, that they'd handled the college fund situation badly, that they hadn't considered how much it would affect me. She said they thought I'd understand, that family was supposed to sacrifice for each other. Then she got to the real reason she was there. She needed me to talk to Alicia. Apparently, Brad and Alicia had a massive fight about money, and Brad had moved out temporarily. He was staying with a friend and refusing to come home until Alicia fixed her family's financial problems. My mom was terrified they were going to get divorced, and she blamed me for causing tension in their marriage. I asked how I was responsible for Brad being an abusive jerk who couldn't keep a job. My mom flinched like I'd hit her. She said Brad wasn't abusive. He was just stressed. Then she cried and said she didn't understand why I was doing this, why I was hurting them when they'd only ever tried to do their best for us both. I told her to leave. She stood up. But before she left, she said something that made my blood boil. She said my grandma, my dad's mom who died when I was 16, would be ashamed of how I was treating family. Grandma had always believed family came first, and I was spitting on her memory. My grandma was the one who gave me $2,000 for my college fund as one of her last gifts before she died. Money that went to Alicia's wedding decorations. I told my mom to get out and not come back. Now here's where I need advice from you all, because this is about to get really complicated. I found out yesterday that my dad has been telling extended family his version of what's happening. He's been painting me as this ungrateful kid who abandoned them in their time of need, who's demanding payment for basic family help. He's got aunts and uncles and cousins texting me about how family should stick together, about how I'm being selfish. But here's the thing. I have proof. I have records of every single thing I've done for them over 3 years. I have documentation of the college fund transfer. I have text messages where Alicia admits what they did. I have my dad's passwords and email history showing exactly where their money went and why they're struggling. And I'm thinking about sending all of it to everyone in the family group chat. I know that sounds nuclear. I know it's going to cause massive drama, but I'm tired of being the villain in their story when they're the ones who stole from me, mocked me, excluded me, and then expected me to save them. So Reddit, should I drop the bomb? Or is there a better way to handle this? Because honestly, after that comment about my grandma, I'm ready to burn it all down. Update 2. Holy hell, you guys. The response to my last post was insane. A bunch of you said to drop the bomb on the family group chat, and honestly, that's exactly what I did. But it went so much worse, or better, depending on how you look at it, than I expected. I spent 2 days putting together a document. Nothing fancy, just a straightforward timeline with screenshots and records. The date they took my college fund, text messages from Alicia confirming it, the wedding costs versus what was actually in the fund. Every single service I'd provided them for free over 3 years with estimated market rates. The student loan debt I'd taken on because of their decision. I also included some things they probably thought I didn't know about, like how Alicia had told our cousin Elsa that I'd offered to pay for the wedding as a gift, which was complete fiction, or how my dad had told his brother that I'd dropped out of college because I was lazy, not because I couldn't afford it anymore. I sent it to the family group chat at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Then I muted the chat and went to sleep. I woke up to 2:47 messages. The family had exploded. My dad's sister was furious at him. Said she'd loaned him $3,000 last year based on his story about me being ungrateful, and now she wanted it back. Elsa was pissed at Alicia for lying about me. Several cousins were asking why they'd been told I was doing great financially when apparently I was drowning in student loans. My uncle on my dad's side sent me a private message asking if we could talk on the phone. When I called him, he got straight to the point. He said he'd suspected something was off with my parents' story but hadn't wanted to get involved. Now that he'd seen the full picture, he thought what they did was theft. He asked if I'd considered taking legal action. I told him I hadn't because it would be expensive and complicated. He said he had a friend who was a lawyer and would be willing to consult for free, just to see if I had options. Before I could follow up on that, my dad called me directly. He was angry. Not the fake disappointed angry, but actually furious. He said I'd humiliated them in front of the entire family, that I'd destroyed their reputation over money I should have just let go of years ago. I asked him if anything in my document was untrue. He couldn't answer that. So instead, he said that context matters, that I'd left out important details. They'd needed to help Alicia because she was their daughter and she was struggling, and wasn't that what parents were supposed to do? I pointed out that I was also their kid, and they'd actively hurt me to help Alicia. He said that was different because Alicia had always been more sensitive, needed more support, while I was tougher and more independent. Then he said something that really showed his whole mindset. When Alicia had needed help, it was for something important, a wedding, starting her life with Brad, building a future. When I needed help, it was just for school, which I could have done anyway with loans, just for school. Like my education was somehow less important than a party. I hung up on him. Alicia started her own campaign. She sent me multiple paragraphs about how I'd ruined her life. Brad had seen the family chat screenshots, and now he was using it as ammunition in their fights. He was saying her family was trash, that they were liars and manipulators. She said if they got divorced, it would be my fault. Then she sent another message that showed how desperate things had gotten. She needed me to publicly apologize and admit I'd exaggerated everything. She needed me to tell the family that I'd been emotional and made it seem worse than it was. She said if I did that, she'd convince mom and dad to pay me back the $8,000 I'd personally contributed to the fund. $8,000, not the full 32, just my portion. And only if I humiliated myself and lied to save their reputations. I didn't respond. 2 days later, my mom showed up at my apartment again. This time, she brought Alicia with her. Alicia launched into this prepared speech about family and forgiveness and moving forward. She said the wedding had been important to her, a once-in-a-lifetime event, while college was something I could always go back to. They'd made a judgment call, and maybe it wasn't perfect, but they'd done what they thought was best at the time. I asked her if she thought it was best to exclude me from the wedding entirely. She flinched and said that was Brad's decision, not hers. I asked why she didn't fight for me. She said she'd tried, but Brad had been firm about the guest list and she didn't want to start their marriage with a fight. My mom jumped in and said they'd come to offer a compromise. They would pay me back the $8,000 over time, maybe $200 a month, if I would delete the document I'd shared and tell the family it was a misunderstanding. $200 a month would take over 3 years to pay back just my portion, and they wanted me to lie to the family? I told them no. Alicia got upset. She said I was being unreasonable, that she was offering me actual money and I was still being vindictive. The family was taking sides and it was tearing everyone apart and I needed to fix it. I asked why I needed to fix a problem they'd created. She said because I was the one who'd exposed it, so now it was my responsibility to handle the fallout. My mom tried a different approach. She got teary and said she couldn't sleep at night knowing her son hated her. She said my grandma would want us to reconcile. That family was the most important thing. I asked her if family was so important, why did they steal from me? Why did they laugh at me? Why did they let Brad insult me and ban me from the wedding? She said I was being cruel, that I was punishing them too harshly for one mistake. I told them both to leave. My mom said she didn't recognize me anymore, that I'd become someone cold and heartless. After they left, I took my uncle up on his offer to talk to that lawyer. Not to sue my parents, but to understand what legal options existed. Turns out, there were some interesting things I could do. I could formally request an accounting of the college fund. Since I'd contributed money to it, I had a right to know where it went. And if they'd used a 529 plan or education savings account and spent it on non-education expenses, there could be serious tax implications, penalties they'd owe on the entire amount. The lawyer also mentioned that if I wanted to be aggressive, I could file a complaint with the IRS about potential misuse of education funds. This would trigger an audit of all their finances. An audit would be devastating for them. They'd have to hire an accountant, provide years of documentation, potentially face penalties. Given how disorganized my dad was with money, there would definitely be mistakes found. That would ruin them completely. They could lose their house. Everything. I was sitting on this decision when Brad called me. He said he and Alicia had separated. He'd moved out for real and was filing for divorce. Their marriage had been failing for a while, but my family's dysfunction had been the final straw. Then he apologized for how he'd treated me. He said he'd been a jerk, that he'd looked down on me because I worked retail while he had a fancy job. Now that he'd lost that job and seen how fast life could change, he understood his attitude had been garbage. He asked if I'd be willing to talk to him about the college fund situation. Said he might need information for the divorce proceedings. After he hung up, I realized Brad divorcing Alicia was going to make everything worse for my parents. They'd been covering Alicia's kids' daycare. Now they'd probably be covering even more because Alicia wouldn't have Brad's income at all. Their financial situation was about to get exponentially worse. Last night, I got a call from my dad's sister. She told me my parents had asked her for more money, said they were about to lose the house. She'd refused and wanted me to know she supported me completely. Then she told me something that changed everything. She asked if I knew that my parents had borrowed money from my grandma before she died. Money they'd promised to pay back but never did. $15,000 right before grandma went into hospice care 5 years ago, 1 year before they stole my college fund. They'd already been in debt and borrowing from family when they made that decision. They didn't steal from me to help Alicia. They stole from me because they'd already burned through borrowed money and needed more. The wedding was just a convenient excuse. So here's where I'm at. I can file that IRS complaint and watch everything collapse. I can pursue legal action for my portion of the fund. I can walk away and let their financial situation implode on its own. Or I have a fourth option. I can offer to help them. For a price. Not money. I could use my IT skills to help them sort out their financial mess. Help my dad find remote work. In exchange, they sign a legal document acknowledging the theft, agreeing to specific terms of repayment, and publicly admitting to the extended family what they did. Force them to own it completely, in writing, in front of everyone. Because those desperate voicemails I mentioned in my first post, they're starting. My mom has left 4 messages in the last 2 days begging me to call her back. My dad sent a text saying they need to talk urgently. Alicia sent a message saying she needs my help with something important. They're spiraling, and I'm the only one who can pull them out. The question is, should I? Final update. You guys told me to go nuclear, and I did. But honestly, it was so much more satisfying than I ever imagined it would be. Let me start with those voicemails because, holy hell, they were something else. The first one came exactly 93 days after I sent that document to the family chat. My mom's voice was shaking, almost unrecognizable. She was crying and talking fast, saying they needed me to call them back immediately, that something terrible was happening, and they didn't understand how this was possible. She kept repeating, "How is this happening?" like she genuinely couldn't figure out where it all went wrong. The second voicemail was from my dad, and he was furious. He was yelling about how I'd destroyed them, how I'd orchestrated some kind of attack on their lives, how everything was falling apart at once and it couldn't be a coincidence. He said he knew I was behind it, that I'd done something to make this happen. Then his voice broke, and he said they'd give me the money back, all of it, if I would just make it stop. The third was Alicia, full-on sobbing. She said Brad's divorce lawyer had subpoenaed all their financial records and found out about the college fund theft, and now Brad was using it to argue that she came from a family of liars and couldn't be trusted with custody decisions. She was begging me to help her, to tell Brad's lawyer it wasn't that bad. that it was a misunderstanding. She kept saying, please, 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 like a broken record. The fourth voicemail was my mom again, this time barely coherent. She said they'd do anything I wanted, sign anything, admit anything, just please make it stop. She said my dad was having chest pains from the stress and she was terrified he was going to have a heart attack. I listened to all four voicemails twice before I called them back. But let me back up and tell you what I actually did, because the comments on my last post gave me the final push I needed. After talking to that lawyer, I spent a week gathering every piece of documentation I had, every password, every email, every financial record I could access through the accounts they'd given me permission to manage. I wasn't hacking or stealing. I was using access they'd voluntarily provided over 3 years of making me their tech support. What I found was even worse than I'd thought. My dad had taken out that personal loan to cover gambling debts from online poker. My mom had 3 store credit cards maxed out that my dad didn't know about. They'd borrowed from my aunt, my uncle, and apparently several other family members over the years, always with sob stories about medical bills or car repairs or emergency expenses that turned out to be lies. The college fund transfer? They'd actually used a 529 education savings account that my grandma had set up for me before she died. Using that money for a wedding meant they owed taxes and penalties on the entire distribution, roughly $8,000 in penalties and taxes they'd never paid. I filed the complaint with the IRS, sent them everything I had, the account statements, the transfer records, the wedding expenses. I included a formal letter explaining that I was a contributor to the account and had only recently discovered the funds had been misused. The IRS doesn't mess around with 529 violations. They opened an audit within 2 weeks, but I didn't stop there. Remember how I mentioned I had all my dad's passwords? I used them to do something completely legal but devastating. I removed myself as the authorized user on every single account. Their streaming services, their email recovery options, their online banking, everything that I'd been managing for them. I didn't delete anything or change their passwords. I just removed my access and let them deal with it themselves. Then, I sent a formal letter to my parents through a lawyer, my uncle's friend who'd agreed to help. The letter requested a full accounting of the college fund, including how every dollar was spent, with documentation. It gave them 30 days to respond and noted that failure to provide this information would result in legal action. The timing was beautiful. The IRS audit notice arrived the same week as my letter, and that same week, Brad's divorce lawyer filed papers that included evidence of financial dishonesty in Alicia's family, using the information from our family group chat to argue she'd been raised in an environment where lying about money was normalized. Everything hit them at once. I waited 5 days before responding to any of their messages. When I finally called my parents back, my dad answered on the first ring. He launched into this desperate explanation about how they didn't understand what was happening, how the IRS was auditing them over the college fund, how their lawyer said they could owe tens of thousands in back taxes and penalties. He said they'd tried to access their bank accounts to pull together documentation, but everything was locked and they couldn't figure out how to fix it. Their email was bouncing messages because the storage was full and they couldn't remember how to clear it. I asked him if he'd kept records of where my college fund money went. He said they had receipts somewhere but couldn't find them all. And besides, they'd used the money for the wedding like they'd told me, so why did it matter now? I explained very calmly that it mattered, because they'd taken money from an education account and used it for non-education purposes, which meant they owed penalties. And those penalties had been accumulating interest for 3 years. I said the IRS was probably going to find other issues too once they started digging, given how disorganized their finances were. My dad's voice got small. He asked if I was the one who reported them. I said yes. I told him I'd filed the complaint because I had a legal right to know what happened to money I'd contributed, and their refusal to provide that information left me no choice. He tried to get angry, said I was destroying my own family over money, but he couldn't maintain it. He just sounded defeated. He asked what I wanted, what would make me stop. I told him I wanted them to sign a legal document admitting they'd taken my college fund without permission, acknowledging it was worth $32,000, and agreeing to a repayment plan of $800 per month until the full amount plus interest was repaid. I also wanted them to send a message to the entire extended family admitting they'd lied about me for years and apologizing for damaging my reputation. My dad said they couldn't afford $800 a month. They were barely making mortgage payments. I said that was interesting, given they'd told me I could afford to take out loans for school while working retail. I said maybe they'd need to get second jobs or sell their car or make sacrifices like they'd forced me to do. He said I was being cruel and vindictive. I said I was being exactly as generous as they'd been to me. Then my mom got on the phone. She was crying again, saying they'd do whatever I wanted. Just please help them with the IRS audit because they didn't know what to do. All their financial records were scattered across different accounts they couldn't access. And the audit was asking for 3 years of documentation. I asked if she remembered laughing when my dad said no one would ever want to marry me. She went quiet. I asked if she remembered telling me I should be grateful they were even asking for help instead of expecting me to offer. She started crying harder. I told her I'd consider helping them organize their records for the audit if they signed my document first, and paid the first month $800 up front. She agreed immediately, said they'd find the money somehow. The next call was from Alicia, and this one was even better. She'd apparently talked to my parents and knew about the document I was requiring them to sign. She was furious that I was extorting them, that I was using their desperate situation to force a confession they didn't owe me. I pointed out that they did owe me $32,000 plus 3 years of interest, which worked out to roughly $42,000 total, given what I'd paid in loan interest because of them. She said I was insane if I thought they could pay that I was going to force them into bankruptcy. I said they should have thought about that before they stole from me. Then she tried a different angle. She said Brad's lawyer was making her look like a terrible person, that she might lose custody of her kids because of this financial dishonesty narrative. She needed me to provide a statement saying the college fund thing was a misunderstanding, that our family had worked it out. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. I said her marriage falling apart wasn't my problem, and maybe she should have thought about the consequences before she took my money and then excluded me from her wedding because I wasn't classy enough. She went quiet for a second, then said something that showed she still didn't get it. She said she'd tried to include me in the wedding, but Brad wouldn't allow it, and it wasn't her fault I'd chosen to hold a grudge instead of being an adult about it. I told her that taking someone's college fund and then banning them from the event you used it for isn't something you get over by being an adult. It's something that defines how you see that person forever. She'd shown me exactly how little I mattered to her, and now she was dealing with the consequences of that choice. She started yelling about how I was destroying the whole family over money, how our parents might lose their house, how our kids were suffering. I interrupted and asked if she'd kept any records of what the wedding actually cost. She asked why that mattered. I said because the IRS was going to want to know where every dollar went, and if she couldn't provide receipts, my parents were going to be on the hook for penalties on the full amount. She got very quiet and said she'd thrown out most of the wedding planning stuff after the marriage started falling apart. I said that was unfortunate for her and hung up. 3 days later, my parents signed the document. They showed up at my apartment with a check for $800 and a notarized confession that they'd taken my college fund without permission and understood they owed me full repayment. They looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen them. My dad tried one more time to make me feel guilty. He said they were going to lose the house, that the audit was finding problems beyond just the college fund, that their retirement was going to be destroyed. He said I'd won. I'd gotten my revenge, so why was I still pushing? I told him I wasn't pushing. I was simply requiring them to face the consequences of their own choices. The audit wasn't my fault. It was the natural result of them misusing an education account. Their financial problems weren't my fault. They were the result of years of bad decisions and lying to family members about money. My mom asked if I was really going to take $800 a month from them when they were this desperate. I said yes, I was, just like they'd taken my future when I was desperate to stay in school. I also told them I'd help them organize their financial records for the audit at my standard rate of $50 per hour. They could either pay me or figure it out themselves. They paid. I spent 6 hours over 2 days sorting through 3 years of their financial chaos, and they wrote me a check for $300 on top of the monthly payment. The extended family has mostly cut them off. My aunt refuses to speak to my dad. Several cousins who'd loaned them money are demanding payment. Elsa told everyone at a family gathering that Alicia had lied about me for years, and now no one trusts anything Alicia says. Brad's divorce went through last month. He got primary custody of the kids because Alicia's finances were so unstable and because the court didn't like the pattern of financial dishonesty in her family. My parents are now paying for a custody lawyer for Alicia, which they definitely can't afford. The IRS audit ended up costing them $14,000 in penalties, back taxes, and accountant fees. They had to take a second mortgage on their house to pay it, the house they might lose anyway because they're so far behind on payments. Alicia moved back in with my parents because she couldn't afford her own place after the divorce. So now my parents are supporting her and helping with the kids, which means their financial situation is even worse. And me? I'm doing great. I got a promotion at work. I'm on track to have my student loans paid off in another year. I'm dating someone I met through a hobby group and it's going really well. My parents have made 4 payments so far, only 48 more to go. A few people asked if I feel guilty about any of this. The answer is no, not even a little bit. Everything that's happening to them is the direct result of their own choices. They stole from me. They lied about me. They mocked me. They spent years treating me like I was less important than Alicia, like my future didn't matter. Now they know what it feels like to have someone take your future away, to struggle and stress and wonder how you're going to make it through, to ask for help and be told you should have made better choices. The only difference is that I'm not rubbing it in their faces or laughing at them. I'm just holding them accountable. Some family members have tried to tell me I'm going too far, that I should show mercy because they're family. Those are usually the same people who told me I should get over the college fund thing because it happened years ago. Funny how family loyalty only matters when it benefits them. My uncle, the one who connected me with the lawyer, told me last week that he's proud of me for standing up for myself. He said my grandma would be proud too, because she hated how my parents babied Alicia while taking me for granted. That meant more to me than any apology my parents could give. So that's where things stand. My parents are financially destroyed, and it's going to take them years to recover. Alicia's marriage is over, and she's living with our parents like she's 20 again. Brad actually apologized to me properly, and we've gotten coffee a few times. Turns out he's not that bad when he's not trying to impress people. And I finally have what I've been working toward for 3 years. Justice. Not revenge. Justice. They stole from me, and now they're paying it back. They lied about me, and now everyone knows the truth. They treated me like I didn't matter, and now they understand that actions have consequences. Someone in my last post asked if this was worth it, if destroying my relationship with my family was worth $32,000. It was never about the money. It was about refusing to be a doormat, about standing up for myself when everyone else expected me to just take it and move on, about making sure that the people who hurt me actually faced consequences instead of getting away with it because we're family. So yeah, it was worth it. Every single second. And to anyone reading this who's dealing with family members who stole from you, lied about you, or treated you like you don't matter, you don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them a relationship. You don't have to be the bigger person. Sometimes the best thing you can do is show them exactly what they taught you about loyalty and family. They gave me a masterclass in it 3 years ago, at that dining room table. I've just been a very dedicated student,